Five Sports. Billy Embody now with On3.com. And Billy, this has to be wild times for you as the season starts. You've got SMU and LSU responsibilities and things you have to cover, recruiting and all that. But conference realignment is what you're going to have to focus on the most. SMU is in maybe the most unique situation ever in that willing to forego for up to 7 years any money coming to them from the ACC. So it's got to be a whirlwind of it. And do you even really know where they feel like they stand right now as getting into the ACC with Stanford and Cal?
Yeah, guys, thanks for having me. It's wild times around here. I'm getting ready to go out to Duncanville, South Oak Cliff this evening. So, yeah, recruiting responsibilities are there too. But I just keep checking my phone, honestly, from different sources and conversations that I've been having for the last week, because this is not something that has gone away behind the scenes. These discussions among, the ACC schools, Cal, Stanford, and SMU as well, trying to make this work. And really what it's boiled down to is the ACC coming up with a unique structure for that revenue sharing to make some of these schools that have been, upset with the amount of money that they're getting right now, happy for at least a little while until, that grant of rights creeps up on them in 2036. They'll kick the can down the road. And, the way they've done it is by these schools lessening their shares that they're willing to take in terms of Cal and Stanford, and then SMU giving up, their primary TV revenue that they would get if they joined the league. And then the league has had to figure out, well, is this all going to work money-wise to make it an unequal revenue share where schools are happy with it and, it works out to keep the votes in the place where they can expand, instead of flipping the votes back the other way where they don't expand anyway, but they, flip the room. It's been this kind of weird, precarious situation on that, because you also have to get ESPN involved and make sure that they're good with it. But a lot of the indications from people I've talked with around SMU, but also even nationally, because this is one of those things where if you don't have the pulse of both sides, you could kind of come out, looking, a little silly. But what most people are saying right now is that this has momentum to get across the finish line. And for the most part, a lot of people, at least that I've talked to, have been confident for weeks, because this is not a situation where anyone can leave for the most part, unless they really want to pay, $500 million or around that number to leave in terms of their grant of rights and giving up that revenue from the ACC. But something has to happen where they find some new money. And the way to do that is to add these schools. And while Cal and Stanford aren't ideal in a sense because they are across the country, and even SMU is not, broken through and won much of anything over the last however long it's been since the death penalty, these are three schools that at least on two sides of it have been in a Power 5 conference and are at least somewhat big names. And then one that is, paying to play at that level, both in terms of what they're giving up and how much money they've spent in facilities and all of that. So right now it sits in a spot where a lot of people are saying it's going to happen. It's going to pass. It's a solution to a problem that there aren't many other solutions out there. And it's something that I think right now, I don't think today as of right now, but Monday, maybe Tuesday, I think we see a decision come down that does lead to expansion.
So for those asking, why would SMU forego all this money? I mean, they're going to have to go into their very deep pockets from their alums and make up for all of this that they would not be getting, and it's not really losing because they didn't have it in the first place, but it's going to be, money they're outlaying. Is this really, it's kind of a no-lose situation for them. Look, if the ACC even disbands in 10 years, at least they shot their shot, right?
Well, and part of it is getting into the club, and a lot of SMU people want in that club so that if college football eventually breaks into a, let's say, 40 schools, because you can look at the ACC, you can look at the Big 12, you can look at the Big 10 even. And, some people would also point to the SEC and a school like Vanderbilt and say some of those schools in those leagues are counting their lucky stars. They're already in them because they have not been run at a very high level. They've had a spurt here or there of winning. They've had a moment in the spotlight, but they haven't been programs that have really been able to capitalize on being in the position they are. And for SMU, one of the things that they've always pitched over the last, decade and a half, that realignment's been a true storyline, is if we were to get in, this is what our plan is. This is the amount of money we have earmarked away. This is what we have in commitments for more money to the athletic programs. We feel like we can break through if we can get into the Power 5 ranks, but it is such a have and have nots. And, you have to have everything come together for you to catch fire, to be a perennial winner, to be a team that can play for, like Tulane did. They caught fire last year. They went to the Cotton Bowl, beat USC, did all those things. Cincinnati had that great run that came together. Houston, UCF in the past. Those things still all have to come together because you have programs that at the G5 level, you just can't recruit that true depth. SMU with NIL has tried to change that. And that's really their idea, is that if they can get in, then they're at least going to be better off long term. And from there, if, let's say in 2036, that's the next round, and maybe that's the final kick when it comes to either disbanding, let's say, the NCAA, or creating a whole nother section or league of college programs that are up at the top. SMU is going to push their chips in over the next 13 years if they do, in fact, get into the ACC and say, we're going to bet on ourselves versus a Boston College, a Rutgers, a Vandy, even, which, even in the SEC, they haven't been able to break through very often. So they're going to try to push their chips in, because whenever there is that next major shift in how college athletics is at least leveled off, D1, D2, FBS, FCS, whatever it is, SMU wants to have done everything they can to be in the best position to be on the right side of that.
For the ACC, is there a benefit to doing this in case you do lose some of those teams like Florida State and Clemson, figure out a way out of the grant of rights for less than $500 million, or just raise $500 million and leave in the next couple of years? At least it keeps you at a certain number of teams that are Power 5 teams and able to maybe not withstand the total blow of losing your two most dominant teams, but at least better off than you would be if you hadn't done anything at all.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is there's strength in numbers. It is really, we have the proof of that now with the Pac-12. They've tried to do the whole, we'll get the deal lined up and then we'll expand and we'll do it in that order. Well, that was clearly not the way they should have done it. You had SMU and San Diego State that were at the very least waiting, willing, all of those things to go as soon as they got the word go told to them. And instead, Kliavkoff wanted to negotiate everything and obviously overplayed his hand. And the ACC is very different in the sense that it seems like this grant of rights is pretty ironclad. And like you said, unless they come up with, $500 million or so, we're probably not going to see these teams leave, Florida State and Clemson notably. So having the numbers in place is really important to this league, because, when it comes down to it, next round of negotiations, this whole market is going to look very different. Streaming starting to catch a little bit of fire, and ESPN's obviously looking into that more and more, but it is just a really difficult situation to kind of navigate, and the ACC wants numbers.
Billy, you wrote also a little bit this week about Mason Smith at LSU. I know this is not SMU related, but Mason Smith at LSU suspended for this game against FSU to start out the year. What are the feelings in Baton Rouge about that? Outside, look, Mason Smith broke a rule. He did a silly thing. I'm kind of surprised this was a hill the NCAA wanted to die on, because they kind of have these ever shifting calendars. Like, look, NIL was passed, but it wasn't official when this happened. They just changed a rule where transfers are getting denied waivers, but transfers that transferred before the rule was passed are getting denied these waivers. So it's kind of a weird situation. I think Mason Smith's caught in a little bit of the middle of this, although he did break a rule.
Yeah, I think you honestly summed it up very well. It's pretty wild that it's a common sense thing on both sides. You know, Mason Smith broke a rule. He could have waited. He could have, we're at the point, I'm 99.9% sure we were at the point that these players knew that NIL was going to, come, and it was going to be legal and all things. But instead, he went through, with the signing, and so did Keishawn Butte. And Keishawn Butte was kind of able to skirt the whole situation, last season. Instead, for Mason Smith, he's getting penalized now, which I don't love. I not even as just somebody who covers LSU, but I mean, there are, somebody on our message board, actually, credit to him, pointed out, Johnny Manziel served a half game suspension. Mm-hmm. Now, in my opinion, Johnny Manziel, they didn't have the proof. I mean, if you watch the documentary, at least that was what I took away from it, is they, ran it well enough to not have proof. Whereas the guy who set up the actual signing for Mason Smith turned him in, which is also pretty wild. But it is one of those things where you got to have accountability. It's a common sense thing on the NCAA side, though, that like you said, you really got to die on this hill. And he's a guy that sat out all last year after a torn ACL. And, I feel for him. I do, because he's a great kid, a young man, who, did everything the right way when it comes to being a 5-star recruit. Just really, really great family. Came, from the home area and ended up at LSU. But, these kids were ready to make money, and he jumped the gun and is paying for it now. And I wish it would just be one of those common sense things where let's figure out a different way here.
Yeah, absolutely. Billy Embody, on3.com. Billy, thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
Anytime. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yep. There you go. So there's momentum.